Now, I showed you some great stuff from the COP29 climate conference in Azerbaijan yesterday. Remember the bloke who saw all the talk about taxing meat to make us all turn vegan to save the planet, and then he noticed what all the delegates were eating?
High-profile speakers talked about meat rationing and a meat tax and how the danger that agriculture and farmers were doing to the climate summit. Well, guess what? At this UN climate summit, you can see right there, they're serving beef hot dogs, they're serving burgers. I have the menus here. Meat is here, and I have not noticed any kind of meat tax additional on the food. There is the line at COP29's food court for the buffet serving meat, another buffet serving meat, and here is the vegan-only restaurant. Doesn't quite look like the same amount of interest by the UN delegation here.
Brilliant stuff there from Marc Morano. He's the founder of the Climate Depot website that has some pretty decent aims, like making informed, rational decisions about what drives the climate, whether and what actions are advisable, how effective they would be, and whether the benefits outweigh the costs. Yeah, costs versus benefits, which is pretty basic judgment. I'm pleased to say that I managed to catch up with Marc just after he returned from Baku to Washington, D.C.
This is my 21st out of the last 23 UN climate summits that I go to in person. This includes when I was with the United States Senate Environment Public Works Committee. This whole conference was about money, money, money. They want to go from $100 billion a year to $1 to $2 trillion a year for this UN climate slush fund.
Yeah, it's frightening. And our Climate and Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, is there, and we're worried about how much money he'll pledge on behalf of Australian taxpayers. But as you say, the tone of these conferences and the elite, I suppose, who turn up to them is very much do as we say, not as we do. And this whole push on taxing meat and other animal proteins such as cheese, yogurt, milk, the works, this is not a fringe element. This is being pushed very substantially by key actors. Here's another spokesperson we've seen overnight.
When we eat meat and dairy, this is causing like 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So it's damaging a lot of things in the world. Climate change is caused for 20% by meat and dairy. So the producers of meat and dairy should pay for the damage they cause.
So it's all about money. They want us to pay if we're eating meat and animal proteins, and they want to use that for their own grand schemes. You've been going to these events so long, Marc. Have you seen the indulgence and hypocrisy increase, or has it always been at warp speed levels?
No, it's increased dramatically. And the big reason I think it's increased is the rise of sort of the corporate government collusion with these conferences. 15 years ago, these were sort of ideological, radical, sort of left-wing. You would have your Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, all these environmental groups. It was more taking it to the man, the system. And what happened is the system, and not the good system of free markets, but the oligarch, billionaire-backed World Economic Forum system sort of took over even more so this process. I mean, it was always the UN, so it was always a corrupt process. But it's really changed, and now you have all the Fortune 500 companies showing up, and it's like a merger now where no one needs to have a democracy anymore. You don't get to vote on any of this stuff. You don't get to vote on banning meat eating. You don't get to vote on gas-powered car bans. And almost every country I've examined and researched, these are done by unelected bureaucrats, by executive orders, and by corporate government collusion. And that's really reflective of what's been happening at these UN climate summits. They become a way for corporations to make money, green investors, entrepreneurs. And you might think, oh, well, that's a good thing. No, it's a bad thing because it's a collusion that they're bypassing democracy with. And that's why the World Economic Forum, right before this conference, once again, they said we need to treat climate the way we treated COVID. They love that lockdown model. And this is why CNN is calling for carbon passports for people who want to travel. This is why this is the intentional rationing of energy, food, and a freedom of movement transportation. That's what net zero is. It's Soviet style central planning That's what the UN is preaching, but with corporate power now behind it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that's what we're facing. And of course, to motivate people towards this authoritarian goal, this sort of one world government they all seem to be aspiring to, central to that motivation is fear. They keep talking up, ramping up the fear of climate change, the alarmism. And that even came through when they saw a message beamed into everyone at Baku from the International Space Station and the NASA astronauts. Have a look.
We orbit the Earth every 90 minutes and can see how our planet is changing, from increased extreme weather like hurricanes to shrinking glaciers and increased wildfires.
There we go again. They reckon they can see the planet changing as they're rotating around the Earth, and more hurricanes, more wildfires. The factual evidence doesn't back up the claims.
No, in fact, the UN reports on the science admits this buried deep in the report. Hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, droughts are either no increase or declining on climate timescales of 30, 50, 100 years. There's no there. You can't go. They talked about climate migrants at this speech. Al Gore shows up and says every prediction climate scientists have made has come true. You know, I'll say one. Polar bears, Gore warned polar bears were in danger. Well, I will say this. Polar bears are disappearing, but only from Al Gore's books and movies, as they're now counting record numbers of polar bears. Al Gore did a sequel. He omitted it. Scary thing about Al Gore's speech at this COP29, he is now partnered with Google to have trace satellites, thousands, tens of thousands of them, put around the world to monitor CO2 emissions from factories, from farms, from individuals. And this I call Big Al is watching you. It's a surveillance system that's going to allow them to start penalizing and put in structures to monitor and penalize companies, businesses, farmers, and tax them for CO2 emissions. And by the way, humans, we inhale oxygen, we exhale CO2. So you have to wonder, are Al Gore and Google satellites monitoring human breath?
Marc, it is extraordinary stuff. Thank God that you are there watching them for us. Thanks so much for speaking with us.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.